Hi, and welcome to Community Bible Church Online. We're so glad you decided to join us today. Our mission here at Community Bible Church is to make sacrificial, authentic followers of Christ who intentionally make him known. If you're in the Canal Fulton area on Sundays, we would love to meet you in person at 9 a.m. or 10:45. Thanks for joining, and let's get into today's message.
How we doing? Doing okay? Anybody Olympicked out yet? No? Just me? Okay, all right. You know it's a good day when you're watching Olympics and then they go to prime time and you're like, I've seen all of these. This is great. I've already been caught up. Happy Olympics. I don't know if that's a thing. Happy Valentine's Day for those who are, in that. I said happy Valentine's Day first service and all I got was, whoa. I was like, wow, all right. Love is in the air. It's good. Hey, if you are a guy, let me just tell you, one of the best things you can do is give your wife a free date to a square dance. There's your plug. The other thing you can do is give them a weekend away by going to a men's retreat. And you'd be like, do you need to go on the men's retreat and just, give me a weekend? So, ladies, you're welcome. Don't say I didn't do anything for you. There it is. 2 plugs. Guys, get your butts to one of those. We are glad you're with us this morning. I want to do a couple, first, some family business real quick and share where we are. So last year, about May, June-ish, we did a series called Beyond Us. And during that series, we talked about the need for a larger building. More than a larger building, we talked about the vision being that we would see a generation that would outpace our current gospel influence. What that means is this. We are praying for the next generation beyond us to raise up to love Jesus far, far greater than even we do. That we would see them surpass our faith. We'd see them surpass in every act of worshiping Jesus as they grow and develop. And we said for that to happen, we need space for that next generation to do that. Because if you've been downstairs in this church, let me just tell you, we don't really have space to do any of that. If you've been down in our church or in the downstairs for first service or kids ministry hour, God bless the people who come to kids ministry because it is not easy to navigate downstairs. It is tight as all get out. And so we just said, hey, what if we sought God and saw what he had for us? And so we felt that God had led us to purchase land on 93. And then we said, what if God's leading us to build a building on that? And we put that before you guys last year. And so last June, just to remind you, we pledged that over the next 25 months, we would pledge $960,000. Now, that wasn't my number. We had actually asked that God would raise $500 and some thousand, and you guys just blew it out of the water and said, we're going to raise $960,000 to go towards this full project of a building. Now, that's going to require some loan and some things like that, but I want to just kind of give you an update on where we are with Beyond Us. So you heard the why. The what is we are pledging that money to build a building on 93. It's right by Clays Park. It's right there on the left side if you're heading towards Tulsa High School. And it is going to be the future home for Community Bible Church. And I wanted to share where we are currently with that process. So if you're new visiting with us, stick with me. Hopefully this is encouraging for those who are part of this campaign. Hopefully even more encouraging. So we are about 95% done with our drawings, and so what that means is once we get those drawings finished up, we can have our final number of what the actual cost of the building is going to be, dollars and cents. And we have been fighting them for the last week and a half, so just be praying for us as elders. This was supposed to be in our hands a week and a half ago. We have not received it yet. So we are at 95% done. I'm like, what's the other 5%, man? Just get it through. And I think there's some things caught up with the county and some things like that they never put red tape in front of things. But apparently, there's some red tape in some county things holding us up a little bit as we move forward with the drawing. So those are about 95% done. Once we get those drawings done, that'll get us a final cost to the building. Tells us all in what we're dealing with. So then we can go to after that is done, we can go to the loan process. And so we have already investigated about 3 different banks and one organization to run that loan for us. And so we just need to actually have the dollar amount projections done so we can go to the loan process and then we can move forward. Once we move through the loan process, that gets approved, then basically means we are set for construction and we can start moving forward in that vein. So A lot of people keep asking me, like, when are you going to break ground? I don't fully know, and we will let you know once we get the final amount, because that's going to really be helpful for us to figure out what that looks like. But we are moving as fast as we can on that, so I didn't want you to think we're just kind of waiting on anything with that. So once we approve all that, we'll move into the loan process. That's kind of where we are in kind of the up and down world. The best part, though, I want to share with you is where we are financially. We oftentimes just, we hear churches putting a building up. Sometimes they get there, sometimes they don't. But for us, I am so thankful that you all have been so sacrificial through this process. So as we said, we wanted to raise $960,000 by 25 months. So that's 2027 would be our goal to raise all of it. We had put that in God's hand, and we said, let's see what God does through you, Community Bible Church. And so just to tell you where we are supposed to be, by June of this year, by June 1st of this year, we're supposed to be at 50% of that money in so that we can move forward. As of last week, in January, or February, whatever that was last week, I think I'm still in January. As of our January numbers heading into February, currently where we stand with what's money in hand is you all have brought in $575,680, which means we're at 60% of the way there already, which is fantastic. Yeah, thank you. That is all you guys, and that is the faith you're putting into this project. I think it means you're tired of the parking lot, which I agree. I'm fully with you. I think that means you're tired of squeezing things in and the heat not being what it's supposed to be. It gets hot and cold. And anyway, we're moving forward, and so thank you so much for that. To be 60% of the way there is huge for us, and it's just another marker that God's going to continue to fund this thing and move this thing in the right direction, and everything's starting to line up to where we're supposed to be. And so we are excited for the future home over there, and it's going to be about close to 11,000 some square feet over there, and sanctuary to seat about 370 plus kids space and lobby and things outside. It's going to be a so much better thing. I told first service, I said, you don't have to worry about any parking, because not only will it be paved parking, and you won't have to worry about finding a spot because we got plenty of spots. If it gets bad, we just park on the grass because we got grass to do that on. So it's going to be awesome. Like, you never have to worry about parking again. And so we're excited for where God's taken us with Beyond Us in that whole project. So that's where we are currently. And if you need more information at all, feel free to grab one of these. They're in the back. It lists everything about what it is, what we're about. It lists some of the things we talked through during the campaign, and share some stories of our people in there. So you can grab one of those on the way out if you're interested in helping us out with that when it comes to Beyond Us. Good? All right, so we're going to jump into Joshua. We are in a series through the book of Joshua, and we've been through the first 8 chapters. We're heading into chapter 9. If you're visiting with us, we tend to just go through books of the Bible together, and there's a couple topical ones we go through, but typically we go through books of the Bible, and we're in Joshua chapter 9 this morning. Before we jump into Joshua 9, though, I want to just hit the elephant in the room. And so for those who you want to talk about this is going to be great. For those of you who are like, I don't care, just tell me what you think. Stick with me. You're both going to learn some things. But as you look through the book of Joshua, you find some very discomforting words in Joshua. You find a lot of warfare. You find a lot of destroy all things. You have a lot of these powerful words that come out of Joshua that if you don't know Jesus and you're not into church, can really throw you off when it comes to what is the Bible talking about with this kind of stuff and this kind of language, and is that the kind of God that you guys serve as Christians? And if so, I'm not sure I want that. And you may relate to what Richard Dawkins, who is really a well-known atheist, he wrote a book called The God Delusion. And in his book called The God Delusion, he says this: the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all of fiction. Let's just highlight that word. That's his take. And jealous and proud of it. A petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak. A vindictive, bloodthirsty, ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infantile, which I can't pronounce the word, a genocidal, facilital, which basically means child-killing, pestilential, man, I'm rough this second service, pestilential, which basically means he brings diseases on all things, megalomaniac, sadistic, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully, easy for me to say. as he lists these, it's hard to read those out loud because that's his take on who this God is. And if you didn't have God in your life, you'd probably look at the Old Testament and you'd probably say, yeah, I think he may have a case. There's some things that are mentioned there that I'm not sure I'm okay with. And so this morning, we're going to talk about, before we jump into Joshua 9, I want to just kind of hit this topic of what is this God doing in the book of Joshua? In other words, is God a moral monster? Did God command Joshua to commit genocide? Is this just a power land grab as you look at the book of Joshua? And these are questions that those outside of the church ask when they come into this kind of a book. And I think it's smart and helpful for us as believers to actually have an answer to these questions. Not just kind of say, oh, you don't understand, God is just doing what he wants to do, but to actually have a response to this. And so I'm going to give you 4 things this morning that I think is true, that is biblical, that is found in Scripture, but also is found in reason, and explain a little bit about this idea of war and that God isn't a moral monster, that God is not commanding genocide here, that he is not just looking for land to grab, but there is something bigger at play. So let me just kind of walk through these, and then we'll jump into Joshua 9. So the first thing is this. Number one, you got to understand in Joshua throughout the entire book of Joshua, I should say, God is punishing evil based upon his justice, number one. We have to understand that there is a category for God's justice, and he is punishing a nation that he has let go for about 400 years. And to see this in Genesis chapter 15, if you go back in your Bible to the beginning in the book of Genesis 15, 13, 16 says, Then the Lord said to Abram, so we're going all the way back to Abraham here, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs. This is coming up on the book of Joshua. This is what we're talking about here. The land that is not theirs is where we're currently in right now. And will be servants there. This is Egypt. Egypt not theirs, and will be servants in Egypt. And they will be afflicted for 400 years, but I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve. In other words, there's a history here of a nation that he is going to come against, but this nation has been existing for a while. And afterward, they shall come out of Egypt with great possessions. So again, you've got Egypt number 1 in this section. And as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age, and they shall come back here in the 4th generation. This is important. This is Joshua here. 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. So he's basically telling Abraham, hey, these Amorites, these Canaanites that we're dealing with in the book of Joshua have been in this land for a long time. And the sins of the Canaanites and Amorites were well known, and they were horrific. They were things that I can't even fully mention because of how bad things moved into this society. The society was one that many believe, and there's actually proof of, that they would offer their children to the gods, and they would child sacrifice them, and not just sacrifice their children, but sacrifice their infants on the god of Molech. And what would happen is they would basically heat this idol up, and this idol would burn and glow orange, and as the hands of this idol were placed out like this, they would place their children on Molech, and they would be basically burned alive as children. And they said that the sound and the smells and things were so horrific that they had to keep mothers and families way in the back so that they didn't have to go near it because they would just lose their minds. And they said the drum beats that accompanied the worship to Molech was so loud just so that it would overpower the wails of the mother. And there was just these sins that they continued to create time and time again. And if you saw this in a nation, you say, God, why aren't you doing something about it? Why aren't you moving against this people? Because they're creating these atrocities and killing children and this whole thing. Why aren't you moving in response to this? And there was a patience that God had until eventually you get to the book of Joshua, and he says, it will be no more, and I will punish the evil based upon justice. Leviticus chapter 18 says it like this: Do not make yourselves unclean by any of these things. For by all these, the nations I am driving out before you have become unclean. He's talking here again about the nations he's driving out with Joshua are unclean. And the land became unclean, so that I punished its iniquity, and the land vomited out its inheritance. That's important. It's a fun visual. The land couldn't even house the inhabitants because of how bad the sins were, and it vomited out its inhabitants. It wanted nothing to do with the evil that was happening on the land, in a figure of speech there. But you shall keep my statutes and my rules and do none of these abominations, either the native or the stranger who sojourns among you. This is God speaking to Israel. For the people of the land who were before you did all these abominations, so that the land became unclean. He says, if you do these things, lest you be vomited out as well. Verse 25, lest the land vomit you out when you make it unclean, as it vomited out the nation that was before you. All that to say, God was punishing an evil that was present, and it's based upon his justice, number one. God is punishing an evil based upon his justice, and he's commanding that they take these people out for the sins that they have committed against God and also against humanity. Number two, theocracy is at play, and this is a unique event not to be repeated today. This is the book of Joshua. This is a unique event not to be repeated, and the fact that God is ruling as the physical king of Israel. There is no Saul, there is no David, there is no king yet, so the theocracy goes to the king Yahweh, Jehovah. That is the king who is ruling, and if the king says to do something, you follow the orders of the king. And God, in this time in Joshua, is commanding these people, hey, it's time to get this sin out of our land. It's a unique event, and it's only here that you see this major thing in Joshua where you see this moving into the promised land. That's number two. Number three, historical and literal context matter when it comes to the book of Joshua. And there are two terms that come into this period of time and in this book of Joshua itself. The first is called Haram, and the second is called Hamas. Hamas is the Hebrew word for sin, and you can do your research on where Hamas came from and the name you hear in the news cycle, but it means sin. And it's this name that's throughout the entire Old Testament when it deals with it. Haram, however, is a military term. It's a slang term, and it's meant to convey the idea of destroying something for human use. In other words, haram is to remove from human use. And here's what that term is used for in Joshua chapter 6. This is Jericho 6:21. Then they devoted all in the city to destruction. This is that word right here. This is that word haram. They devoted all of the city to destruction. They removed it from human use, both men, women, young and old, oxen, sheep, and donkeys, with the edge of the sword. Now, when you talk about this term haram and this word as a military term, this was not just a Bible term. This was a term used by all the kings and a lot of the nations that they had back then. There's actual proof and documents of nations that use the same term when it comes to military conquest. They haramed, they took them to total destruction, is the term that they use in the military language back then. And throughout Joshua, there will be statements of this kind of haram as he talks about destruction and taking things out. A couple things you need to understand in military terms. Number one, many have said that Jericho as a city is an outpost or a military city, not just a normal city. When we hear God taking out a city, we immediately go to 2026 and we think, oh, what a nice suburban city. It's got a Starbucks on the corner. It's got some swing sets and playground over there. It's a nice city where everybody lives because it's where you take out New York City. That's not like a political thing. It's a city. Jericho was what many believe to be a military outpost. And so most of the people, they say, that were in Jericho at this point in time were part of a military outpost. And most of the city dwellers, quote, lived outside of the city walls because of the land and things that they needed to farm. And it was a very unique, cultural time in that. And so that's one thing, is military outposts without where any combatants were located was number one. There wasn't a ton of people in Jericho. As we said last time, Jericho was the size of our lot of land that we bought over here in Tuslaw. It's about 6.7 acres, and that's the size of Jericho. So it's not a large city, okay? And within it, probably about 2,000 people were in that city, and you can kind of just say, well, okay, so the destruction wasn't that bad. But to me, that doesn't solve the problem of there's still destruction. Let's not hide behind it's not bad and saying it's still a problem because he's commanded complete destruction or to remove from human use. Here's my hope that I have, and you can agree with me on this or you can disagree with me on this, that's fine. But here's what I have found in a lot of the research and looking at a lot of Old Testament researchers, a lot of Old Testament commentators, as well as those who've done their research. Harem does not always mean destroy, but rather to put out of human use. It was a military term used by other nations, and it came as a term of hyperbole. In other words, they would say it's a hyperbole term that basically, if we were to say, like if I were to tell you, hey, the Seahawks annihilated the Patriots in the Super Bowl, you would say, okay, they did a good job on defense, very defensive game, which is very boring, but whatever, they did a good job, right? So the Seahawks annihilated them. If I said they annihilated them, not one person in this room would say, they actually killed all of the players on the Patriots? Like, that's not right. They had knives and guns, and there was blood on the field, and it was like they had to mop up the field with all the blood because they killed them. No, it's a term that means complete destruction. We ruled that. I mean, we took them out, right? They're done. It was a hyperbole, and it wasn't meant to convey a total destruction. And so for some, they would say this idea of harem pertains here, where it's hyperbole, and it's used of war to say we won, and we won without any kind of excuse. Like it was just complete and utter domination is how we won. Now, annihilate does not always mean annihilate, as we've seen here and as we've seen before. The combination, John Walton says it like this, one of my Moody professors as well as his son wrote a book, and it says the combination of the hyperbolic rhetoric with the successful harem of the city means they decisively cleared them out of the city one way or another. And basically what it means is this: those who were combatants, they fought and they killed. Those that weren't, they said they were allowed to flee and leave. How do I know that? Because if I look at a couple other stories in Joshua and in the Old Testament, they're commanded to kill everybody in the city, and yet a couple chapters later, or even a book later, we find that there are still those people existing. How do they still exist if they completely took them out is a question we have to deal with. And so I take the term to mean more of a hyperbolic, and it says that they committed to destruction all of these things. If you go literal and not literary, right? So I'm going literary and keeping literal at play. I'm taking a literary term that's used in the Old Testament in a way to describe it, but I'm also speaking literally that they chose to follow the same practices of the warfare language here. Even if you don't buy that, and you're kind of like, I don't know, Joel, you think you're just trying to get around it. I really think it was literal. Okay. I'll go there with you. Even if you do think it's literal, I think we have to both agree of this point number 4, and that Jericho and Ai were unique events to bring justice to evil and fulfill God's promise and his purpose. And we have to have this kind of category in following Jesus Christ, even if it's things we don't like. There are so many things in the book of Joshua I don't like. I can explain it and say, it's true, it's there, but I just don't like the way it's handled. But the reality is, God can do as he sees fit because he is God and we are not him. We are not on God's radar to search us out and say, hey, I was going to take out Jericho. What do you think? That doesn't happen. God's not searching for our opinion. God is going to do as God is going to do. As A.W. Tozer says this, God is his own self-existent principle of moral equity. How big is that? God is his own self-existent, nobody caused him to be, principle of moral equity. So in other words, whatever he sees fit and says is the right thing to do, he has the right to do so because he's God. We can question it as much as we want, and we can not like it as much as we want. But the reality is, if we keep God in being who he said he is, self-existent, his own moral equity, and when he sentences evil men and rewards the righteous, he simply acts like him himself from within, uninfluenced by anything that is not himself. In other words, we have to wrestle as believers in Jesus Christ, as followers of Christ. We have to wrestle with the fact that we are not him, and we serve a God who is bigger than us and other than us. And when there's things that we come to in Scripture we don't like, we have to go back to God's character and the Word of God. And we have to keep going back and reminding ourselves, even if I don't like it, he's acting justly. To me, I think of the Jericho thing, and I think, man, you're on one side or the other, and it's almost like God can't win. On one side, you're like, why didn't you handle that abuse of children and evil and things earlier? And on the other side, you're like, why you got to deal with them that way? God's kind of like, which one do you want? Do you want me to destroy evil, or do you want me to not destroy evil? And we're stuck in the middle, and that's why he's God and we are not. And so this morning, it's not all that you need, but it is hopefully helpful to think through. These are going to be situations you're going to hear about as we go through the book of Joshua, and I wanted you to have some grounding in why we think what we think and what the Bible says about it. If you are interested in more, and some of you guys are, some of you are not, but I knew this would be something that may prick an interest, and so this QR code, if you scan it, will take you a page of resources that we have on this subject of Canaanite warfare and how could God be just or not just in doing this thing. So in this resource page, there is everything from a 2-minute video. You're like, just give me the 2-minute video and let me understand it. There's a 6-minute video that I think is really well done. There's a 30-minute discussion from Dallas Theological Seminary that's Q&A, which asks a lot of really good questions in it. And then lastly, there's a resource for the book that I used for a lot of this research called God of the Israelite Canaanite Conquest, which, again, I don't recommend unless you really, really, really want to dive into it because it's a hefty book. It's a big read. I was working through it this week, and I'm like, it's not one you just pick up and you're like, I wonder what I'm going to read at the beach this summer. Not a summer read for the beach this summer, okay? Just going to put it out there. But it is a resource. So if you want any of those resources, just click the QR code. It'll take you to that page. There's videos for those who are more auditory visual learners. There's the book if you want to even deeper dive into it. But I find it helpful in understanding this whole idea of Joshua. Good? Okay. All right, so that's the intro. So sorry. For those who are visiting this weekend, you're like, he's got more? I apologize, but I got more. Here we go. Joshua chapter 9. We're going to jump into the text that we were supposed to be looking at this morning. I just thought if I don't address that, it's something we have to talk about as we look at this whole thing. So this morning, we're looking at the book of Joshua. Here's your 2 themes. Ready? Discernment and deception. Okay? That's what you're going to see throughout the entire book, or through the entire chapter of chapter 9. Discernment in the midst of deception. Now, I know many of us have never lied, right? Many of us are like, what is this what is this deception that you speak of? I have never lied to anybody in my entire life. Not to my kids, not to my wife, not to my friends, not to my... We've all lied, right? We've all had this idea, if I can get away with a good lie, I'm done really well. If I get caught in a lie, I got to work my way back out of the lie. But there's also this thing that how do we deal in discernment with people who are liars, right? Those that choose to lie to us. And how do we be discerning in the midst of it? And that's what you're going to see in Joshua chapter 9. We could have got a bunch of different ways, but I feel like God's wanting us to see the Gibeonites in deception and discernment and how we can be wise in handling the lies that come around us. So just as you are looking there, here's where we are in a map. This is where we started. This is kind of the base camp over here. And then they've just taken out Jericho. They've taken out Ai. And now this people right here are the ones that you're going to hear about today. So they are very close to Ai. They're very close to Jericho. Some say within 14, 15, maybe as close to 20 miles away from these cities. And you're going to hear that they are going to lie about where they live, and that's going to be an important piece. But let's start in Joshua chapter 9, and we'll talk in verse 1 about what's actually happening here. So they've just won the battle of Ai, they've just won the battle of Jericho. We pick up in verse 1. As soon as all the kings who were beyond the Jordan, that's this river here, in the hill country and in the lowland, all on the coast of the great sea toward Lebanon, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites heard of this, and they gathered together as one to fight against Joshua and Israel. So what you would say is this area up north, this area to the sea, this area right about here, down to the south here, and there's probably another nation there. So if you kind of divided it out, it would kind of look like that. And there, he's basically saying the enemy is from this location, the enemy is from this location, this location, this location. They've all said, hey, we're going to go to war, and we're going to come at Jericho, and we're going to take Joshua out. That was their thought. Let's all gather together. We're better together. Let's do this. Here's the fascinating part of the story. We don't hear much about this from here on out because the coalition never happens. It never got established. They're like, let's go. Let's not go. And so you don't ever see this established. Instead, what you see is the story of this little territory here called Gibeon, okay? And so we're going to hear about that as we move forward. Now, first thing you know about Gibeon is this. In Joshua chapter 10, verse 2, it tells us that Gibeon was a great city, number one. It was one of the larger, better cities around the area, like one of the royal cities, so they had a lot of money. And because it was greater than Ai, which is, again, we knew that, and all its men were warriors. That's a town, right? How'd you like to live in the town that was all warriors? Like all of them, like they're just Krav Maga everybody. Like it's just like, you do Krav Maga? Oh, I do Krav Maga. You kill people? I kill people. Like, it's just like, that's just their thing. Like, everybody that you talk to is just this magnificent warrior who could take anybody out in a second. Like, that's a town I'd want to live in. I wouldn't, like, last long because I'm not the manliest of men. But I'm telling you, I'd like to, like, get close to me, like, sup? I'm a warrior too. And they're like, kind of, you know. But I'm like, I would love that. I would love to be in a city like this. It was huge. It was powerful, full of warriors. This great city. And this city, in this town known as Gibeon, was very close. And they decide to play a trick or lie to Joshua as they move forward into the territory that Joshua is in currently. So that's what we need to know. The other thing you need to know is that somehow the Gibeonites knew something of the Old Testament. And scholars still to this day don't know how they knew this, but they knew something about the Old Testament. And what they knew about the Old Testament was in Deuteronomy chapter 20. And in Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 10 to 11, there's a group of people that you deal with them this way in battle. And then in Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 16 to 18, there's another group of people and you deal with them this way. In the first group of people, those are the people that live far away. He says this, when you draw near to this city that is far away to fight against it, offer terms of peace, and if it responds to you peaceably and opens to you, then all the people who are found in it shall do forced labor for you and shall serve you. In other words, don't kill them if they live far away, they shall live, okay? But for those cities who are close to you, in Deuteronomy 20, verse 16 to 18, cities that are close and that are listed, which, by the way, their town is listed in the list, so you can't get away with that. Like, their list is the Hivites, that's part of them, and the Hittites, that's part of their crew. It says, you will destroy them, but in the cities of these people your God is giving to you as an inheritance, you shall save alive nothing that breathes, but you shall devote them to complete destruction. So in other words, the Gibeonites were a great city of warriors, but they also knew if we live far away, we get peace. If we live close, we die. Far away means we live, close means they would be killed. So they realize they've just been told about, they just found out about Jericho and Ai. Let's go to verse 3. But when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they on their part acted with cunning and went and made ready provisions and took all these things. I'll get to that in a second. So in other words, Jericho and Ai, they lived close enough that the word had to travel. They had no social media. There was no internet. There's nothing to tell what happened. If you knew what happened in a city close to you, the only way you knew that is because you lived close to it. Does that make sense? So if they lived far away, they would never have heard of this because they weren't close enough to live next to Jericho and Ai, but they were close enough, so they decide, hey, if we go and they find out we're close, we die. So let's figure out a way to get around this. And here's their way around this. Verse 4. So they were cunning and made provisions and took worn-out sacks for their donkeys and wineskins worn out and torn and mended, with worn-out patched sandals on their feet, and worn-out clothes, and all their provisions were dry and crumbly. And they went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said to him and to the men of Israel, we have come from a distant country, so make a covenant with us. But the men of Israel said to the Hivites, again, there's your word, the Hivites, that's one of the ones listed, perhaps you live among us, then how can we make a covenant with you? In other words, you came here, how'd you know we were here? You must live close. How do you find all this out? They said to Joshua, we are your servants. And Joshua said to them, who are you and where do you come from? This is important. They said to him, from a very distant country your servants have come because of the name of the Lord your God. For we had heard a report of him and all that he did in not Jericho, not Ai, because those were too close. We heard of all he did in Egypt. Smart enough to know if we say Jericho, we're goners. But if we say Egypt, we're at least in the vicinity of like everybody's heard of what they did in Egypt. So we're safe if we say Egypt. And that he did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon, the king of Heshbon, and to Og, the king of Bashan, who lived at Ashtaroth. We live far enough away, man. We don't even know you guys. We just heard what you did in Egypt. That's number one. And then they really go and try and sell it with the next part. Ready? We heard of all that he did. So our elders and all the inhabitants of our country said to us, take provisions in your hand for the journey and go meet them and say to them, we are your servants. That part is true. Okay, we got one truth and all the deception, and that's it. The elders said go, we went, but here's all the stuff that they did lie about. Ready? Here we go. Here is our bread. This is great. It was still warm when we took it from our houses as our food for the journey on the day we set out to come to you. But now, behold, it is dry and it is crumbly. Like they're acting it out, right? It's just like, it was warm and we ate cakes and breads, but look, it's nothing, right? And they're like selling it. Like they're acting, I had to imagine like selling this thing. Like, we couldn't even eat it. Look at how bad it's been. We had nothing to eat. Guys, we had nothing to eat, right? Nothing to eat. It's all crumbs, right? They're all emptying out. Yeah, crumbs, all the way back. We got crumbs. There's nothing left, right? And he says, here are bread. It's just crumbs and all we have left. Then these wineskins were new when we filled them, and behold, they have burst. And it's like, we left, and it was so long of a journey, the sun baked them, and they have nothing left in them. I can almost imagine a guy with a knife in the back, like, yeah, they burst. Look. It's that bad, right? They're selling this thing. They are really trying to say, it's been a long journey, man. And we've got proof. We got crumbs. We got bursting wineskins. Look at how bad this is. So these men, it says, and then these garments. And these garments and sandals of ours are worn out from a very long journey. So imagine that. Like before they leave camp, they're like, how's this look? Oh, you got to rip that a little bit more here. Make sure that's torn there. That's really way too nice. Those sandals look way too good. Let's dirty them up. Let's get the sandals off. That one should be like barely resting on your front toe. Like that's all you've got. It's just a toe of a sandal. Like that's all you got moving towards these people. We need to really sell how hard this journey was. It's 14 miles away. It's like if you're trying to sell, hey man, I came from a long way to Canal Fulton today and you live in Massillon. Like that's not going to sell. Like, why are you wearing the orange tiger thing? Don't worry about it. I've just come a long way and you need to understand, like it's been a great big journey that's come. So the men took some of their provisions. It says this, so this is where they get themselves in trouble. So the men took some of their provisions, but did not ask counsel from the Lord. We're going to do that in just a second. The deception that was given by the Gibeonites here is on display. Deception was their battle plan. Normally, for us, we are the same way. When we want something, we are after something, deception, lying can become our method to get what we want. And here's the thing. Deception normally starts in a neutral place, does it not? When we lie about something, it's typically because we want something, and it's not normally aggravated, like I want this huge whatever. It's typically just something we want on a normal day-to-day basis, and it starts in a good place. I really want it. And then you realize you've got obstacles in your way to get it, so there's one way to get it of just being honest and transparent and working through it, or there's the faster way that we think, and that's just if I lie, I get it faster. If I can deceive them, I can actually get this way I want it. And what they started was normal. They wanted protection. They wanted to live there. They wanted God, but they didn't want to go through God to get to the survival. And so what deception happens when we start lying, it can quickly turn on us, though. And it can quickly turn into sin. Protection goes to all-out fear. Our want turns into selfishness or even into anger if we don't get what we want. And when you find yourself deceiving, it just starts to build upon itself. James chapter 4, 1-3 reminds us that the reason we have quarrels and fights among us is because we want something but cannot attain it. We fight and we quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask, he says. You ask and do not receive because you have asked wrongly to spend it on your own passions. So James even tells us, hey, this deception thing is part of all of our lives. And he reminds us that when these Gibeonites came, they came with an agenda. And so the first thing is this, deceptions always come with an agenda. And the Gibeonites, they just wanted to get to Yahweh without having to go through Yahweh. We want what Yahweh offers, but we don't want to have to actually submit to him. Deceptions come with an agenda. I mean, you know this as a parent. Like, if you've got kids, you know, like, they've got agendas, and typically their agenda is not your agenda. But their agenda trumps your agenda because they're like, I can sell this. And if I can't sell this, I can lie my way through it. Ever been caught in a lie? That's the worst. Because you know you're busted, they know you're busted, and yet you just keep building the same lie. But here's how I can explain. They come with an agenda at first, though. And they always come with, I want and I need this in my life. But what happens is if we get caught, then all of a sudden we start to have to work double time because it takes extra work to work yourself out of a lie than it does to create the lie. Whenever you like create a lie, you're like, okay, if I got this response, and if they ask about this, we're gonna make sure I was covered here. When I was, give an example, like when I was growing up, like curfew was ridiculous in my mind. Like it was like, be home by 9 p.m. What are you talking about 9 p.m.? Night doesn't even start by 9 p.m. And so I always had my plans like scheduled out, right? Like, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna deceive by making sure I can get out the house, and as I get out the house, I'm gonna make sure I have this, and I'm gonna make sure that here's my favorite trick. Whenever I would pull in late or out of curfew, I would turn the car off about like 300 feet from the driveway because it was a gravel driveway, and that's loud. And so basically you just turn the car off because I had a bigger car at that point, and then you just kind of coast into the driveway. And as you coast into the driveway, you got to make sure you hit the lights before you go in there, and then you coast in, and then all of a sudden you're locked in, you put it in park, and you slowly open the door, you slowly close it. And then the worst part is getting in the screen door because the screen door is loud, but there was a way around that too. And so I worked my way into that deception, and there was nothing worse than like closing the screen door behind me, and I turn around, and my dad's just sitting on the step, and I'm like, hey. And he goes, I didn't hear you come in. I'm like, yeah, about that. That was weird. I don't know how you didn't hear that. And I would just try and like work my way through. And whenever you're caught in a lie, isn't it true? Like you're always like scraping at that point. Like, and why didn't you call? And back then you had an excuse, right? There was no phone. That was awesome. Living in the 80s was great. 90s, that was awesome. I was going to call you, but nobody had a phone. So, I just got track of the time. Or, hey, my friend just really needed to talk to me. It was just a rough night for them. Was it? Yeah, they weren't deciding between Taco Bell and McDonald's. I wasn't sure how to best guide their decision, so we prayed about it all night, and we decided Taco Bell was probably the best thing to do for them. It was a great prayer service. We just said, I lied all the time, and what happens is deception builds upon itself. But as you know, as you get older and as you have kids yourself, deceptions are funny then, but when they happen to you, isn't it true that when deceptions happen to you, they make you feel betrayed, angry, and used? And we would never say that out loud, and that's never the purpose that I would want my dad to feel betrayed, angry, or used. But when you've been lied to, it's the worst feeling ever, especially if it's your own family and you're in flesh and blood, because it's like, you didn't trust me enough to talk to me about this. That just hurts. Like, why didn't you just be honest about it? Why you got to lie about it? Why can't we just have a dialogue? It always makes us feel betrayed, angry, and used. And you're going to see that here in Joshua. There is a feeling of being betrayed, and it makes them angry, and they felt used, and they're like, how do we fix this lie of the Gibeonites? Deception makes us feel angry, betrayed, and used. Let's pick up in verse 14 here as we learn some of the lesson. So the men took some of their provisions, but did not ask the counsel of the Lord. That's key here, right? They took the provisions, but they didn't ask God what the plan was for the provisions. They didn't even seek God in it. They do not ask counsel, and that's huge as we look at this passage. And Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them. This is important. You're going to see that in a second. And let them live. And the leaders of the congregation swore to them. In other words, you got some pretty big terms happening here. The deception worked, and now we've got a covenant and a swearing by all of these things. What happens in deception is if we're not careful, we just immediately fall into the trap of whatever lie it is. But what God's asking Joshua to do and us to do as well is to be discerning in how we handle the lies that come into our life. Whether they're the lies that you tell yourself and be discerning about those, or whether it's the lies that you hear from family and friends, whether it's you personally trying to sell a lie, I don't know. But all of it revolves around this idea of discernment. And discernment is what Joshua lacked because he didn't seek God in it. Number one, discernment is a key muscle to train and establish as a follower of Jesus Christ. Discernment is a key muscle that we have to work on. 1 John 4:1, Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirit to see whether they are from God. For many false prophets have gone out into the world. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 8, the wisdom of the prudent is to discern his way, but the folly of fools is deceiving. Again, you see it clearly. Wise people are discerning. Foolish people are all about lying and getting what they want that way. A wise woman builds her home, but a foolish woman tears it down with her own hands. Proverbs 14, verse 1. One of my favorite verses, Philippians chapter 1, verse 9. And it is my prayer that your love may abound more and more with knowledge, this is cool, and discernment. The more you love someone, the more discerning you should be. Love is the connection to discernment. Not just to find out the lie, but I love them enough to grow them and coach them, and why deceiving is not the way we go about these things. It is my prayer that your love may abound more and more with knowledge and discernment. He says, and even in Hebrews chapter 5, but solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of, there's our word again, discernment, trained by constant practice. Okay? Discernment comes through constant practice. If you're not practicing it, if you're not training it, it's hard to get there. But discernment trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil. Discernment takes humility to ask for help in our prayers. It reminds us that as we go into this thing of knowing what God wants, it takes us an opportunity to say, I need to discern through humility that I don't have all the answers, and I need to discern through my prayers what is actually happening. The other thing that says is this: discernment requires pausing. It requires that we stop and we think and we process what's actually happening before we make the decision. Discernment requires pausing. Proverbs 18:17, the one who states his case first seems right until the other comes and examines him. Everything you see in social media, everything you see on our news feeds could be really, really helped by this verse right here. Everything you see come across your screen by the media is meant to irritate you or aggravate you or press your button to get the clicks that they want. It is really important for you in this day and age to memorize this verse. The one who states his case first seems right. Anger, frustration, this is your feed. This must be right. This is exactly what happened in the news cycle. Until all of a sudden you wait about 2 weeks and people examine it, and then you're like, oh wait, that didn't actually happen the way I thought it did. Oh wait, I was sold something that was a lie. I was lied to by my social media feed. I was lied to by these people that thought they had the right answers. They just want to get the news story out. Wise people pause and examine to see what actually happens in discernment. Not only that, let's see how this goes in Joshua chapter 9, verse 18 here and 20. He says this. Lost my paper. Verse 18 to 20 says this. Sorry, I'm moving on in this one. But the people of Israel did not attack them because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. Then all the congregation murmured against the leaders. Remember how I said discernment makes you feel angry, betrayed, and used? They gave this promise. They let them live. And then all of the people of Israel do what they do best. They murmured against the leaders. If you've been through the book of Exodus, this is nothing new. Moses had this all the time. They murmured against their leaders because they felt betrayed, they felt used, and they fell for this deception. How could you let them live? They lied to us. If you took this to a case in the court system today, you'd win. I guarantee Joshua, if he would take this to a court today, they'd be like, you lied. You lied to Joshua, so therefore it's null and void. Joshua wins the case. But Joshua does something different here. He actually keeps his word. But all the leaders said to the congregation, we have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. Now we may not touch them. This you will do to them. Let them live, lest wrath be upon us, because of the oath that we swore to them. Hey, we promised by the Lord that we would do these things, so we're going to keep our word. Keeping your word is so vital today in this idea of not only discernment, but our own character. We all know that words matter, but keeping your word is a clear sign of maturity and character. And keeping your word and pausing in discernment go hand in hand, especially as a parent. Let me just give you a case in point. As a parent, have you ever found yourself in the moment of complete anger and frustration with your child, no matter what age, and they've lied to you or they've done something to break the rules, and your head is going to explode because it's the 80th time you told them not to do what it is that they've done, and your first instinct is, they're going to feel my wrath, right? And so you promise things that you're never going to deliver on. My parents did this all the time. You're grounded for 20 years. And I'm like, you don't even know what grounding means. Like, I'm going to look it up. And when I find out what grounding means, 20 years you're grounded for 20 years, right? It's taken or maybe they're little. And I've had parents talk about it in our small group about this. I'm going to take every toy you own and we're throwing it away. I've said this many times to our kids. And we're just going to take them all up. We're going to throw them right in the trash. You're going to watch me do it. Right in the trash, right? Because I'm mad, I'm upset. I've tripped over that thing for the 5th time. You've not cleaned your room. And what happens is we say things out of anger that we're never going to follow through with. And the more you do it, the more your kids are like, okay. And they start to call your bluff, and that's the worst. You ever have a kid call your bluff? Like, you won't. Okay. And at that moment, you just go to the next level, right? You just said, I won't. Let me show you that I will. Those kind of lies and those kind of deceptions that come kind of again, those can be avoided if we take the first part of our lesson, actually talk about discernment and pausing and pause. Because here's what freaks your kids out more than grounding for 20 years. You ready? What freaks your kid out more than grounding for 20 years? I'm going to ruin it for a lot of you guys in the room, especially if you've got kids, so don't use it against them. But I'm just saying, what works the best is this. You have that moment of frustration. They see your face is getting red. You know you're mad. You're about to lose it. The best thing you can do to freak them out is this. I'm going to talk to your mom. We're going to talk about this. We're going to get back to you on what's going to happen and walk away. You want to freak a kid out to be like, oh my word, I went nuclear. Like, they didn't just respond. They're going to go talk to mom. They're going to go talk to dad. Like, ooh, like that. I had moments like that, and there was rare, but man, there were moments. And when they said, we're going to go talk about it, I knew I'd done something. And there's nothing worse than sitting in your room or sitting in that lie or sitting whatever it is for that next 30 minutes. You want to really freak them out? Wait a day to actually bring the punishment down, because then they sit in it for a day, and they're like, I know it's coming. I know it's coming. Like watching watching their back. Like, when's it going to happen? When's the shoe going to drop? But I remember when we actually came out of that, it does a couple things. Number one, it allows our words to actually have meaning in our parenting. It allows us to actually follow through. It allows us to be rational in our discipline. It makes the punishment fit the crime, rather than being like, I've had a rough day, and you're going to get all my explosion on a rough day, right? No, it allows the punishment to fit the crime. We talk about it like, okay, I was going to lose it on them, but this is probably not that big of a deal. Or, you know what, this is a bigger deal. We need to actually have some pretty big consequences for this. There's something that is valuable in pausing and discerning and pausing in our approach, that our words actually matter. And for Joshua, the words actually mattered. We swore an oath and we'll keep it. Do you know that the Gibeonites here in Joshua 2 or in Joshua 9, when they are promised this doesn't only last to Joshua's generation, this passes beyond to the further generations. The next time we see the Gibeonites that we see in the Old Testament is 2 Samuel chapter 21. And in 2 Samuel chapter 21, this is a freebie, there's a king named Saul, and a king named Saul is trying to prove his might, and so he attacks the Gibeonites. And he attacks the Gibeonites without any kind of warning and takes them out. And as a result of that, David hears from the Gibeonites, hey, Saul took us out, and at the sake of this promise in Joshua, David has Israel go into Saul's house and kill his grandkids at the cost of going after the Gibeonites. This promise was severe. This promise was listed. And not only that, this promise was good, because this promise not only saved them, it brought them closer to who God is. We're going to close with this. Here we go. At the end of chapter 9, here's what happens to these Gibeonites after they make this promise. He says in verse 20, Joshua summoned them and he said to them, why did you deceive us, saying, we are very far from you when you dwell among us? Now, therefore, you are cursed, and some of you shall never be anything but servants, cutters of wood, and drawers of water for the house of my God. Now, you're like servants, and that whole thing doesn't fit well with me. I don't like that. But here's the thing. He's moving them closer to the tabernacle. He's moving them closer to seeing the tabernacle used every single day. It was hard work. They were men of warriors. This fits their job. But they drew closer to God and closer to God. They were taking the job of the Levite priests at this point. And eventually, the Levites and the priests would actually take back over this work. But for now, he's drawing them closer to God. In your deception, Gibeonites, I'm going to try and turn that for good by putting you closer to this God who you want nothing to do with. So he did this to them and delivered them out of the hand of the people of Israel, and they did not kill them. In other words, he had Israel that was ready to kill them, ready to take them out. He's like, no, I'm going to move them closer to God so that nobody touches them. But Joshua made them that day cutters of wood and drawers of water for the congregation, for the altar of the Lord to this day, in the place that he chose. To this day means it was still happening. There was this moment where God saw through the deception and brought through a promise. Now, where do we land the plane this morning? Here's where we land the plane. Number one, it'd just be good to look at Joshua 9 and say, okay, what stood out to me? Was it the deception? Was it the idea that I struggle with that? Or was it more of God's promise that he protected them even in the midst of a lie? That he still saw through and had compassion and concern for them? And number two, I would ask this question: what lies do you feel like you've been deceived by in your own life? And for some of us, I've talked to some of you guys, this last month's been tough. I've talked to a lot of you, and mentally, anxiety and pressure and depression has been a hard thing this last month. And you believed a lot of your own lies, and lies from the enemy, of the God's forgotten you, and you're never going to make it out of this. But the reality is they're deceptions, they're lies. And what you need is discernment. You need discernment from the Word of God. You need discernment from prayer. You need discernment from God's people. So what lies have you been deceived by? And maybe for some of you, it's a wide open conversation to say, what lies have you been deceiving others with? My boss, my wife, my employers, my husband. What lies have you been constantly trying to feed, and you're tired of filling them? You're tired of I've always got to make sure I've got the right answers because I've just been trying to sell the lie. It's always harder to do that instead of just being honest and open and saying, here's where I have failed, and admit and confess and come clean and say, God, this is where I'm at. Spouse is where I'm at. Job is where I'm at. Just to come through so that we are men and women of character. As we head into the season of Lent, which is already coming up very quickly here, maybe it's an opportunity for you to set some new limits for yourself so that you can be men and women of character. What that means is simply, maybe it's a morning and evening routine where I'm just asking and asking for discernment from God as I start each day. It's praising God for the discernment He gave me through the day that I've already lived. And so it's that morning and evening routine. I don't know. What I'm simply asking is this: where do you feel like character is being under attack? And where is it easy to lie? And where can we find discernment and come back to the God who promises to be gracious to us and forgive us as we move into another day? Let me pray for you, pray for me as we wrap up this morning. God, this morning has been a lot. There's been a lot of different pieces and parts. And so here's what my prayer is, God. My prayer is simply this: that your Spirit would speak to those of us this morning. I pray that you'd speak to us clearly so that we would know what is it that you're trying to get us to understand from this text. It's not just hearing a story of Joshua. It's actually, how do we apply it today? And so I pray, God, that you would do that. Whether it's this idea of I just need to come clean because I've got these things I keep lying about and trying to deceive. Maybe it's I need to fight the lies that I tell myself. Or whatever it is, we know that your character is just and good. And so we come to you humbly and ask that you would cleanse us from all unrighteousness, and you would make us more like your Son every single day. Father, give us your wisdom, give us your discernment. Help us to pause often to receive it. Not to be like Joshua and just rush in, but to pause and seek the Lord in these things. We thank you.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope that today's message helps you to follow Jesus and make him known to those around you. Again, we would love to see you in person on Sundays at either 9 a.m. or 10:45. We hope to see you soon, and have a great week.